January 7th, 2026, 4:17 AM local time, 400 nautical miles southwest of Iceland. In the pitch black of the North Atlantic, a single command breaks the silence. Execute. From the darkness above, fast ropes drop onto the deck of a rusting 24-year-old oil tanker. Within seconds, elite operators from the US Coast Guard Maritime Security Response Team are swarming the vessel. The captain of the tanker is screaming into his radio. He claims this is an act of war. He claims his ship is under the protection of the Russian Federation. He demands the Americans stand down immediately, but the Americans do not stop. 47 minutes. That is exactly how long it took for US forces to breach the hull, storm the bridge, and seize total control of the ship. At 5:04 AM, the Russian flag was lowered and the Stars and Stripes was raised in its place. This wasn't just a drug bust or a routine inspection. This operation brought two nuclear superpowers closer to a direct naval confrontation than at any moment since the Cold War. But here is the mystery that intelligence analysts are still trying to unravel. To protect this one old, decaying ship, Moscow had deployed surface warships and attack submarines. They risked a global conflict to get this vessel to Russia. Yet when the Americans opened the cargo holds, they found absolutely nothing. The ship was empty. So why did Russia deploy its navy to protect a ghost ship? And how did the United States manage to seize a Russian-flagged vessel in international waters without starting World War III? This is the complete story of the Marinara, the ship that exposed the limits of Russian power. To understand why this raid happened, we have to go back 24 days to the warm waters of the Caribbean. It starts with what experts call the Dark Fleet. After the Ukraine war, Western nations cut Russia off from global shipping. They refused to insure or transport Russian oil. So Moscow built a shadow economy. A global network of over 1,000 aging vessels with no clear owners, no insurance, and no oversight. These are zombie ships. They turn off their transponders. They paint over their names. They operate in the shadows to keep oil revenue flowing to regimes like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. For Washington, these ships aren't just economic lifelines for their enemies, they are high priority targets. In December 2025, the US government decided to strangle the Venezuelan economy completely. A partial blockade was imposed. Any sanctioned vessel approaching Venezuela would be seized. Enter the Bella One. On December 14th, a US Coast Guard cutter spotted this tanker 80 miles north of Venezuela. It was flying the flag of Guyana. When ordered to stop, the captain did something unexpected. He ran. The Bella One turned hard toward Venezuelan territorial waters. The crew refused to lower ladders. They maneuvered aggressively, blocking US small boats from boarding. It was a race against the maritime border, and the Americans lost. The Bella One crossed into Venezuelan waters before the Coast Guard could stop it. For the US Navy, it was a rare and humiliating public defeat. The ship had escaped, but the Americans didn't stop watching. They just switched to a different kind of eye. High above, commercial and military satellites tracked the vessel to a Venezuelan port. They watched as work crews spent days painting over the hull markings. They watched as a new name was stenciled onto the stern, Marinara. And, most critically, they watched as the crew painted a Russian flag on the side of the ship. This was the shield. By transforming the ship from the stateless Bella One into the Russian-flagged Marinara, the crew believed they had bought immunity. Attacking a Russian ship is an attack on Russia itself. On December 28th, the newly christened Marinara left port heading for Murmansk. It was going to run the gauntlet across the Atlantic Ocean, but it wasn't alone. As the tanker crossed the mid-Atlantic, American P-8 Poseidon aircraft detected something alarming. The Marinara had escorts. 2 Russian surface combatants were operating nearby, and beneath the waves, sonar buoys confirmed the acoustic signature of a Russian attack submarine. This was an unprecedented level of protection for a commercial tanker. This brings us to the most tense moment of the operation, the psychological standoff. As the Marinara approached the strategic choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, known as the Gjök Gap, the trap was set. The US Navy had positioned destroyers and cruisers equipped with Aegis combat systems. The aircraft carrier, USS Gerald R. Ford, was launching combat air patrols nearby. When the Coast Guard cutter Bertholf moved in for the seizure on January 7th, everyone held their breath. The Russian captain on the bridge of the Marinara knew he had backup. He knew there was a Russian submarine somewhere below him. He knew his government had warned the US that seizing the ship would be a hostile act. So why didn't the Russian escort fire? Why did the Russian sailors on board the tanker offer only passive resistance? The answer reveals the brutal reality of modern hybrid warfare. The Russian commanders likely ran the calculus. They realized that while protecting the tanker was important for prestige, it was not worth losing a submarine or starting a shooting war with a US carrier strike group. But there is a darker psychological layer. The crew of the Marinara realized something terrifying in those final moments. They were expendable. They were pawns in a geopolitical game of chicken. Moscow was willing to use the ship to test American resolve, but Moscow was not willing to die for it. When the Americans called the bluff, the Russian protection evaporated. The crew destroyed their logbooks. They smashed their computers. They tried to wipe the evidence of their orders, but they did not fight. They knew no one was coming to save them. But how did the US legally justify this? How do you seize a Russian ship without breaking international law? The lawyers at the Pentagon found a loophole, a weapon just as powerful as the special forces. They argued that the reflagging of the ship in Venezuela was a fraud. Since the change of nationality was done solely to evade law enforcement, the United States refused to recognize the Russian registration. In the eyes of Washington, the Marinara was not Russian. It was stateless. Under international maritime law, a stateless vessel has no protection. It belongs to no one. It can be boarded and seized by any nation at any time. It was a legal sleight of hand that stripped the ship of its diplomatic armor instantly. When the dust settled, the reality of the prize became clear. The cargo holds were empty. Critics in Moscow and Beijing immediately condemned the operation as an act of piracy. They pointed out that the US had deployed billions of dollars in naval assets to capture a rusted bucket of air. But military analysts argue that the empty hold makes the message even louder. This operation wasn't about oil. It wasn't about the value of the ship. It was a demonstration of reach. By hunting down an empty ship protected by submarines, the United States sent a clear signal to every other captain in the Dark Fleet. It doesn't matter what flag you paint on your hull. It doesn't matter if you have a submarine escort. If we want to touch you, we can touch you. The Marinara was towed to an American port. The crew was arrested, and the chess game in the North Atlantic continues. In a world where shadow wars are fought on the open ocean, the seizure of the Marinara proved one thing. There is no such thing as safe waters anymore. What do you think? Was this a brilliant enforcement of international law, or a dangerous provocation that pushed the world too close to the edge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to understand the future of naval warfare, make sure to subscribe.